Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Real Talk Divorce San Diego. Today we're going to be talking about divorcing like you're planning your future relationships and why that's important and why it matters. My name is Lynn Waldman. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and mental health professional. I help people get through the difficult emotions of divorce, and my co-hosts are here with me today. Shawn Skillin, family law attorney, Mark Hill, certified divorce financial analyst. Could you guys please each tell us a little bit about your practices?
Sure, my name's Shawn Skillin. I'm a family law attorney here in San Diego, and I provide personalized divorce transitions through mediation and collaborative divorce. It's my job to try and help you get divorced in a financially economical way and in a way so as to preserve your future relationships with each other and with your children while you restructure your family. So you can reach me at ShawnSkillinLaw.com online.
I'm Mark Hill from Pacific Divorce Management. We're in the Del Mar area. I am a certified financial planner, certified divorce financial analyst. I work with the financial aspects of divorce, have a strong bias towards alternative dispute resolution, do a lot of collaborative divorce, a lot of mediation, a lot of co-mediation with attorneys, and I can be reached at 858-509-2320 and check out my website at pacdivorce.com.
Now we kind of have a little bit of an urgent situation coming up that we wanted to tell our viewers about. It has to do with the tax law. So Shawn, can you please tell people who are considering divorce or thinking about divorcing in the near future some important financial legal information that they need to know?
Yeah, so as we've been talking about on the show for the last few months, last December the federal government passed the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, and part of that new law has to do with spousal support and the fact that it will no longer be tax deductible for divorces that are finalized after January 1st, 2019. So if you've already filed for divorce and you're in the process of getting divorced, you need to talk to your attorney about trying to complete your divorce before the end of this year if spousal support is an issue, so that you can maintain the tax deductibility of the spousal support for the spouse that is paying the support. If you haven't filed yet, you could still file for a legal separation because there's no 6-month waiting period for that, and get your legal separation completed before the end of the year, again, to preserve the tax deductibility of the spousal support. The other option is to talk to your attorney about entering a partial judgment. So even if it's not possible to get your divorce done by the end of the year because you filed more recently, you could enter a partial judgment on child support, spousal support, and some other issues, and get that judgment done before the end of the year. If you can get your judgment entered before the end of the year, then you preserve that spousal support deduction going forward. You're grandfathered in, so to speak, so that even if you have to change the spousal support order in the future, it will still be tax deductible for the person who is paying it and taxable to the person who's receiving it. You don't have to have completed the 6-month waiting period to get your judgment entered by the end of this year. That 6-month waiting period only applies to your status as a married person versus a single person, and the court can't terminate your marital status and make you single until 6 months and 1 day has passed. But you can enter a judgment before that 6-month period is up. It'll just say, hey, you won't be single until whatever 6 months is in the future. So there are still ways that you can get this done. And I'm going to ask Mark to give some examples of financially why it can be really important for your family and save your family money. So Mark?
Yeah, so there's really 3 major criteria to see whether this applies to you. The first one would be you've decided you're going to divorce. Either you have filed, but you've let the case kind of go quiet because you have something in place that kind of works for you. Or B, you know you're going to divorce, but you just haven't pulled the trigger yet, and you don't know that there's any reason to do it quickly. I'm going to give a specific example of a case that we just worked through. It's a higher dollar case, and that's the second criteria that is important. This hurts more or helps more if we can get it done this year, the higher the family income. Number two, most important thing is there's a disparity between the spouses' incomes. And so one is the high wage earner, perhaps focused on the career, the other one stayed at home, took care of the kids. The larger that disparity, the more that this has an impact. And finally, a longer term marriage, so that support will be an issue. If you've been married for 6 or 9 months, support's not going to be something we're looking at. But if this is a 15, 20-year marriage, then that's very, very important. The specific case I want to talk about today was a fellow who was making around about $500,000 a year, so a higher wage earner, long-term marriage over 25 years, 3 children, 2 were out of the house, but 1 was still in the house. And the spousal support number we came up with was around $12,000. Under the current tax law, and since this is what we were able to get executed this year, that will only cost him something in the region of $6,200 of after-tax money. So $12,000 goes to the spouse, but because it's deductible to him, his after-tax cost is around $6,200. The wife's was in a lower tax bracket, so she was actually going to receive about $9,300 from that $12,000 after she paid tax on that income. So we have a disparity between 62, his cost, and 93 that she was going to receive. After January the 1st, if you've not got something in place, the way this is going to work is that we're going to have to split the difference. It's going to cost him maybe $7,000 or $7,500 to get her maybe $7,000 or $7,500. So we're really talking about a disparity of $3,000 more to go for yourselves, for your kids, if we can get it done this year in these higher dollar cases.
So I just want to make sure that this is clear and that I'm understanding what you're saying, because I was under the impression that if people hadn't filed their paperwork by like June, then any chance of being grandfathered in and still getting the tax deduction was over. But what you guys are saying is that's not the case. You could agree on a temporary child support amount and file that with the court and not worry about whether or not the MSA is done by the end of the year, your marital settlement agreement, as long as the spouses have an agreement about what their support's going to be and they file that with the court, then they're grandfathered in, yes?
I'm going to pass it back to Shawn,
yeah.
because there are some gray areas still.
Okay.
So maybe not. So first of all, it doesn't apply to child support, only to spouse support. Second of all, there's no IRS rulings or comments or anything on exactly how they're going to interpret this new law. But I think the only way that you can be more sure that this is going to be tax deductible going forward is to enter a judgment, not a temporary order, a judgment. So there's a difference between a temporary order or a judgment. So you'd have to enter a partial judgment on spousal support, or maybe child support, custody and visitation, and reserve jurisdiction on the property issues. So a judgment is more of a final order. In family court, that's kind of a misnomer because it's never really final when it comes to spousal support and child support. You can modify it later, but it's not a temporary order. A judgment is a judgment. So you want to enter a partial judgment. The other thing is that you don't have to wait 6 months to file your MSA. If you've already reached your agreements, you can get it written up and approved and down there with your lawyers to be walked through the court so that they can have the judgment entered even if the court can't terminate your marital status. It'll just say on the judgment, there's a little line that says marital status will terminate on, and that date might be in January or February of 2019, but your judgment was entered before December 31st, 2018, so you're grandfathered into the spousal support. So I know it's really confusing, so do go talk to your attorney. You also may want to talk to your accountant who may look at it a little bit differently. And again, there is no IRS ruling on this to give us any more guidance, but that's what we as attorneys in this community have been talking about as to how you can get it done.
And that really could really change both parties, both clients' standard of living if they have the reduced amount and they're not able to get that judgment.
And it will also reduce the amount of child support because there will be less after-tax income available for support. So it does, even though it doesn't directly impact it, it has a sort of an ancillary effect.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because the DissoMaster, which is the computer program that the judges here in San Diego County use to calculate child support, is a tax-based program. So if the paying spouse no longer has that tax-deductible spousal support that they have, they're going to be paying more taxes. In the case that Mark is talking about, they're talking about paying taxes on $144,000 worth of income that he wasn't paying taxes on before. That's going to lower the amount of money he has after taxes, which means he has less money available for spousal support and child support. So the computer is going to come up with a smaller amount of money for both spousal and child support. So the whole point of trying to maximize these tax laws to your advantage are to save money for your family and not give that extra money to Uncle Sam. There's going to be less opportunities to play with that after the first of the year.
So what are the deadlines now? Like, what is the last opportunity somebody might have to file that judgment? And of course, it's going to depend on whether or not they can agree to a certain number with their spouse too, right?
Well, again, this could be modified down the road. So again, I would suggest that if you think you have, this applies to you based upon the criteria we talked about earlier, talk to somebody. Call me, call Shawn, call somebody who can essentially walk you through how it might impact your own personal situation.
Yes.
But as regards the actual dates that will be the last dates we can actually get something into court, I will pass it back to my legal colleague here because we still don't know.
Yeah. So the court will have something that we call walk-through judgment days. And those haven't been announced yet, but all of the courts in Vista, El Cajon, Downtown, and South Bay will have walk-through judgment days. They usually start the end of November and go through the end of December, sometimes as late as that last week between Christmas and New Year's. Mm-hmm. So those dates should be announced somewhere around the 1st of November. And what that means is that your attorney needs to call or go down to the court to set a date for something called an ex parte hearing. And there's a $65 fee, I believe, to set the ex parte hearing. And that all has to be done, and all of your paperwork has to be down to the court 10 days before that walk-through judgment date. And each court will have their own date. So you need to know which court you're in and which date applies to you. And then, of course, everything has to be down there 10 days in advance. So if those dates start the end of November, then that means that you've got to have time for your lawyer to write up your marital settlement agreement, do all of the judgment documents, make sure everything's been reviewed by you and the other attorney, the mediators, whoever's involved, and then get everything signed, sealed, and delivered down to the court 10 days in advance of those walk-through judgment dates. So again, please contact your lawyer, let them know you're interested in getting this done before the end of the year, and try and be working in advance as much as possible, because the lawyers are busy. You aren't the only case that they have. They're only going to be able to get so many of these cases done before the end of the year.
Now, if any of the viewers out there accidentally call me about financial or legal questions, I will promptly refer you to one of these two guys, because you seem to have a lot of knowledge about it and could help them navigate the system when it's difficult and there's a lot of questions. And
it's just getting down to the wire. So if you think you want to get done, get on the same page as your soon-to-be ex-spouse and get with your mediator, your lawyer, your collaborative divorce team, and kind of get on the stick, because we are running out of time. All right, so back to the other topic.
Yeah, so what else about planning divorce, like we're planning future relationships? What else comes up for you guys when we think about that?
Well, many times clients maintain financial encumbrances with their ex-spouse and don't think about what that means for the impact on the relationship. Sometimes we have a situation where a spouse has to be tied in with their ex. They have no choice. They co-own a business. It's the only way they can both make a living. They have to be able to divide their two lives from personal and professional, which hopefully they've done throughout their lives working together anyway. But I've learned over the years that you want less things to fight about after the divorce as possibly you can create a situation to deliver. Mm-hmm. Because if you co-own a property post-divorce and say one of you's living in it, we get the situation of, well, I don't like the bathroom anymore. It's old and it's kind of broken and I want a new bathroom. Well, who pays for that? the outspouse, the one not living there, they're getting no benefit from it. Well, they might get a benefit when the property's sold, but they may decide they don't like the way the in-spouse is actually going to do it. So determining in the agreements any financial ties that you're going to have post-divorce as to specifically what will happen in any eventuality, do all the what-ifs, make for better post-divorce relationships. Because once the divorce is final, once the property settlement is done, once you've agreed on support, there's really only one thing left to argue about, and that's the children. And if you can get a good parenting agreement in place and think about all the concerns that divorced spouses face around parenting, if you can address those in the situation where you're doing your marital settlement agreement, I would urge you to do exactly the same thing when you're doing your arrangements that's not around the kids but around the money. Keep it as separate as possible.
And I would agree, because when I come up with parenting plans for people, the more specifics we have, the less opportunity there's going to be in the future for disagreement. If we can come up with specific plans for holidays, vacations, and even coming up with step-up plans as the children age, all of that, just parents know what to expect, they can plan for it. It just takes away other opportunities for where they might disagree. So definitely.
And we do that too around the kids' expenses.
Mm-hmm.
So are we in agreement that they should be on the traveling soccer team or the traveling cheerleader team? Are we in agreement that we're going to pay for that equally? Are we in agreement that they get new cleats every year with the most fashionable color? If so, who pays for those? What if the old cleats still fit? You know, those kind of things. It sounds silly, but it's often the silly which we as professionals might see as kind of, really, they're fighting about that, irrelevant things that have big impacts on post-divorce relationships. And as you always point out, Lynn, if you have children with someone, you're going to have a relationship with this person for many years into the future.
Yes.
And so you want to set it up for success.
Yes, absolutely. I've even had people come up with a plan for the animals when the dogs and cats are going to go back and forth with the kids, and who's going to take care of them. So, and you know, that is something that's really more doable when you're in a mediation or a collaborative divorce, because if you're in court, and you can speak to this, Shawn, you're not going to get those opportunities to be specific or have unusual plans as part of your parenting plan. The court just doesn't allow for those kind of specifics.
Well, the court doesn't allow for the parenting stuff because when you go to court and you have to have the court help with your parenting plan, you go to family court services, and they're very limited in time. So like holidays, you're going to get a little chart that says mom gets this in the even, dad gets this in the odd, and it's going to be 8 to 8 or whatever. You don't have the time to develop a fully fleshed out like holiday and vacation plan where you can kind of customize it to fit your family traditions and things that you want to continue to honor. But we're talking about divorcing so that you're thinking about kind of future relationships. And so what I think of is if you're still fighting with each other over this marriage and the end of this marriage and how things are going now that this marriage is over, it makes it difficult for you each to move on and have a new relationship that's, you know, kind of healthy and happy because you're still stuck fighting over things here. So I like to help my clients nail down as many specifics as possible. So whether it's the parenting plan and being specific about holidays and birthdays and when someone gets their driver's license and whether you buy them a car and how do you share the car insurance and does the kid have to pay for their own gas and all of do grades matter before they get their driver's license, all these kinds of things. It leaves less for you to argue about, which leaves you more free to have a better ongoing relationship in the future with someone new. The other thing is that there are a lot of things in your divorce agreement that you have to take care of after you leave our offices. You need to close bank accounts. You need to change the beneficiaries on your life insurance or your health insurance or fix your car insurance and separate those things out. So make sure that you get those things taken care of, especially things like retirement plans. Get those quadros filed, get those funds divided so that all of that stuff is taken care of. And again, then it's done. And that's less that you have to worry about and less that you have to fight about. The other reason that it's good to have details, especially around the parenting plan, is that when one of you does start dating or gets married to someone new, then there's a clear guideline of what you two as the parents have agreed to. Because I've seen divorce files go from being nice and thin, which means it was a very amicable divorce, to being really thick when somebody gets involved with a new partner or a new spouse because they don't like the way your divorce agreement was worked out. They might be jealous of how well you co-parent with your ex. And my advice on that is, if you run into that situation, to run far, run fast, don't turn around and look back. I don't care how cute they are, how much money they have, or how good the sex is. Having all those arguments come up in the relationship that has been working well so far just isn't worth it. Not that anybody ever listens to me when I say that, but that would be my advice.
But so that's really important, maintaining trust with your co-parents and the kids, keeping commitments. That really matters. And that goes a long way.
It does, because you have, as Mark said, if you have kids together, you guys are joined at the hip until one of you or all the kids are dead. And nobody really wants to have any of that happen. We're not trying to wish that on you. So you do have to figure out how to co-parent and get along as business partners raising these kids, if nothing else. And so having all of those rules around, the property you share together, the kids you share together, fleshed out and set clear expectations from the get-go makes it a lot easier for everybody to get along going forward.
I had a call yesterday that raises a question that relates specifically to this. I had a call from a grandfather, from the father of one of my clients, desperate to get something that would give him some rights, him the ability to make sure he's going to see his grandchildren, because he's very anxious, doesn't have a particularly good relationship with the father at this point, and it probably won't get better during the divorce process, he thinks.
And the father is his son?
No, the wife is his son. He doesn't get along with the dad, and so he's concerned after the divorce is that will he still have access to the kids?
I see.
So again, maybe it's not a real fear, but when clients bring this up, I don't know quite how to address that.
So it is a real fear. From a legal perspective, and then we'll let Lynn jump in with the psychological perspective, but from a legal perspective, grandparents have very few rights. Unless you've been actively involved in raising your grandchildren, like they've been living with you, you've basically been a de facto parent, you don't have a lot of rights. So the court's not going to deal with making sure that you're granted any kind of visitation with your grandchildren. So there's a couple of important things here. If the two parties getting divorced are in mediation or collaborative divorce, then you can bring that up to your kids, and you can say, hey, could you build something into your divorce agreement where they get to come to visit us for a week every summer on spring break or something like that. And in a mediation or collaborative context outside of the court, you could do that. The court's not going to deal with it. So if you're concerned about that, that's one way you could go about it. The other thing I'd say is, to the divorcing couples, be careful what you say about your divorce to your family and your friends. Because if you paint this horrible picture of your soon-to-be ex-spouse to your parents, then they're not going to end up having a good relationship with your ex, which may mean the whole grandparenting thing is very difficult to work out, especially if, God forbid, something happens to you. So say you've told your parents that your ex-husband cheated on you and hit you and did all these horrible things to you, and now your parents can't stand this guy. And maybe your dad's come over and threatened him, which has happened in some of my cases, and you get hit by a bus. And then your parents are left trying to establish a relationship with this guy that you've just told them how horrible he is to see his own grandchildren, which may not work out. So think twice about what kind of divorce story you tell to your own parents and your own family members if you kind of want people to get along in the future.
Can I get clarity, sorry, just around one thing you said?
Yeah.
You said the courts won't deal with it, but can we put something in a marital settlement agreement that talks about the grandchildren, even though the courts wouldn't address it?
Sure, exactly. If you're outside of the court in mediation or collaborative divorce, you can build in whatever you want to do. I've done marital settlement agreements where they say, hey, the kids go with, grandma and grandpa every spring break, and they go to Lake Tahoe, or they go to Minnesota, or they go wherever it is. we've built those things into a marital settlement agreement, but the court is not going to order that because the court has no jurisdiction over grandparents except in very limited circumstances. So that, again, is one of those agreements that you can work out between the two of you if you're not depending on the judge to make the rules for you.
And really what's most important is the kids. The kids benefit from having a relationship with grandparents. Grandparent relationships can be so special, and that is something that will stay with a child their whole life. And I always tell parents, the more people around your kid that loves your kid, the better. You don't necessarily have to like that grandparent or get along with them, but think about your children, your children's needs, and putting them first. That's what really matters, is your kids. So if you can stay focused on your kids and what's best for them, that might help parents get through not really appreciating that other person, but still allowing them in your child's life.
Yeah. And my advice for grandparents is be careful how you get involved in your kid's divorce. Don't start taking sides. Try and be the calming force, the voice of reason. Don't go over and, threaten the ex-husband to protect your daughter, even though that's a really strong instinct. Let the police do that if there's really a dangerous situation, because again, if you alienate yourself from one of those parents and that parent ends up having control of the kids, for some reason at some point in the future, you're going to have severely limited your ability to have access to your grandchildren. So try and take a step back. And not take sides. You can be supportive of your kids, but you don't have to become an enemy of the soon-to-be ex-spouse.
There's a skill that I like to talk to my clients about, and I think it would work well for grandparents, parents, and grandparents. It's called opposite action. So you might be feeling a certain way towards someone, but I want you to think about, is my urge to act how I feel, is it effective? Is it going to get me to where I need to be? And if it's not, I want you to pay attention to what that urge is and do the opposite. So if you're angry and you feel like arguing or fighting and it's just not going to be effective for the relationship or the kids, do the opposite. Be approachable. Put that disagreement aside, even if it's valid. Because you may have a valid concern, you may be upset about something that it would make sense for you to be upset about, but it's not going to help the relationship, it's not going to help the kids, so do the opposite.
Be strategic, not emotional.
Yes, and it takes practice and forethought, but it works.
And we do know that the thing that causes the most harm to children in divorce is ongoing conflict about the kids that involves the kids. So there's enough of that usually between the two parents that we try and help them learn how to manage. We don't need to add the grandparent part into it and have that made exponentially worse. So if everybody can kind of just take a deep breath and think about what's best in the long run for the kids, everybody will be a lot happier.
So this may sound like a strange question, but it just popped up into my head now because I'm always thinking about that when I'm with clients. What would be a silver lining that you would see for your clients in working with you or working with you, Shawn, legally? What are some silver linings that you've seen for people when they've gone through the divorce? Because divorce is terrible, it's trauma, it's difficult, it changes our identity. But in that trauma, somewhere, I think people do grow and there's a silver lining. So I'm wondering if you guys have noticed.
I think that, from the financial viewpoint, the reality is that most marriages have a division of labor. No one signs a contract the day after the wedding that says, you know what, you're going to go to work and make all the money. I'm going to stay home, take care of the kids, do the shopping. You're going to carry the garbage out. But normally over time, we kind of devolve into these areas. And it's healthy and it's kind of efficient if you think about how a couple works. But the problem is when the couple split, the skill sets are not in the same place. If in a traditional marriage where, say, the husband's been the worker and the wife has stayed home, he may be clueless about the children's schedules, about what their needs are, what gets little Johnny to go to preschool without crying. I mean, all that stuff he's going to have to learn. But on the other side, she may not have taken care of the money at all in the marriage, and so she may feel at a disadvantage. So through the divorce process, focusing on that, I've been able to actually empower not always, but mostly women who feel terrified going into divorce because they believe the husband has such an advantage because he has all the financial data and he knows how it works. And I've even seen cases where the wife will just say no to everything because if the husband suggested it, it must be bad because he understands it better than her. So my role becomes the one of educating the sort of the unmoneyed spouse so that they can be a participant in the process and actually grow throughout it. And I've seen people become empowered through this. I mean, that's the ultimate success in terms of an outcome of working with a client who comes in terrified, not willing to talk about anything.
And also fearful that they could end up, like you were telling me earlier.
The lady from Rancho Santa Fe who was convinced she was going to be living under an underpass.
Yes.
And by the way, the corollary to that was her husband, who was making nearly $1 million a year, wondered if he ever was going to be able to retire. So the anxieties are on both sides. Are they real? Well, I think I can give you a reality test if you let me sit down and look at your numbers.
Yes,
you know.
yes. So data before fear,
Yeah.
and that empowerment with knowledge. Yeah.
I mean, any major life change is an opportunity for growth. So, you know, you can either let it kind of sink your ship, or you can take a look at the situation and figure out how you can deal with it and grow. And I see women grow in exactly the way that Mark has described, you know, taking control of their own finances and learning how to balance a checkbook and learning how to pay the bills and learning how to set up auto pay and learning how to set up a budget so that they do know that they're going to be secure. Sometimes it's the mom who's been taking care of the money, and then dad has to go, oh, you mean we've got this? And again, those things kind of happen almost accidentally in a marriage, this division of labor. So I always tell new couples, do what you do with intention and pay attention so that you can make these roles deliberately, make these decisions about who's going to do what, and then revisit it when that situation is no longer workable for somebody. The other place that I really see a lot of growth in is in the parenting area. And I'll say mom and dad, even though I totally recognize that sometimes we have two moms and sometimes we have two dads. But there's one parent usually who does the majority of the parenting. And that person is the person who knows their schedules and knows their teachers and knows how the homework works and all of those kind of things. But the other parent needs to be given a chance to step up. And if that other parent steps up, then everybody's good, right? You know, the kids have a better relationship with both parents. And the benefit to the parent who did all the labor in the initial part is that they get a break. And so even moms who are terrified about that first weekend that they spend away from their children, 6 months or 8 months later are calling me and saying how nice it is to have a weekend off and how much more they appreciate their children. And the other parent, let's say the dad, it takes them 6 or 8 or 9, 10 months to get it figured out. How do I go to work and go to the grocery store and pick up the kids and get dinner on the table and get the homework done and get them to through the bath and into bed on time? It takes them a while to work through that. But when they do, they often feel like they have more of a voice in the parenting and more an active role in the parenting, and they're actually able to develop a better relationship with their kids than they had before because for whatever reason they had deferred to mom or the other parent.
Not an event.
Right.
That was, I think that's a really important point you made, was basically that they won't get it right first off, and whether it's financial or whether it's parenting issues, cut them some slack, give them the opportunity to, and often we don't, is the truth of the matter.
We don't, and so it is a process. There's really usually not a light bulb moment. It is a process for both parties in getting divorced, trying to figure out how this is going to work. There's this period of setting new boundaries. You know, the boundaries before were within this small window of the marriage, and now maybe you're still sharing the same house, or one of you is moved out, and the out spouse still thinks of this house as being their house. The divorce isn't over yet. And so they come over to pick up the kids, and they march right up the driveway and in through the front door, and maybe the other parent's running around in their underwear. And that was no big deal during the marriage, but it is now. And so the other parent's like, what are you doing walking into my house? You need to knock or stay in the driveway, and I'll send the kids out to you. Just text me and let me know you're here. There's this initial period of trying to figure out where the new boundaries are. And so initially they're usually very strict. And then as everybody gets used to things, then they kind of lighten up a little bit and you kind of redraw them. So it is a process in many different areas, and you just kind of need to give each other the time and the space to work through those. And in doing that, hopefully you're going to learn something new about yourself and about the other person and about what worked and what didn't work in your relationship, so that when you move forward to those new relationships, you'll do it a little bit better the next time.
And that's what I've seen also, that because divorce is trauma and it changes identity, that through this process, clients do actually get a stronger sense of who they are, what their values are, how they want to live their life according to their values, what matters, and that sometimes in communicating with their now ex-spouse, it's not so much what the disagreement is about, but it's about how they communicate. And
so don't use the kids as messengers?
Don't use the kids as messengers,
Yeah.
right. And it's sometimes it doesn't even matter what the issue is.
Yeah.
It's how you approach that other person. And if that changes, that can change the whole dynamic, and they become really great co-parents.
And people can be really good co-parents, even if they weren't good spouses together. Maybe they were never going to have the kind of relationship that was going to benefit both of them, but that doesn't mean that they can't be good parents together. So, working
Personal
on that
story.
communication is very important.
Divorce.
About which marriage, Mark?
Yeah, the first one.
Okay.
And my son was 2.5 when we separated, he's 37 now, so that tells you how old I am.
A while ago.
But the reality was, when he was about 19, he's back from college, I take him out for sushi, and I ask the question every divorced parent wants to ask but is terrified of the answer of, so what was it like growing up for you? And the response was fascinating. The first thing he says was, well, you and Mum are so different, I can't imagine you guys ever being together. That was the first words out of his mouth. And then he says, but I never heard either one of you say a bad word about the other, and I knew that you both loved me. I mean, it even makes me emotional saying it now. And I thought, wow, as difficult as that was, we were able to do that right.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a successful young man that I'm extremely proud of. And again, you can be a good co-parent. I
Can be
was
done.
involved. I coached his soccer team. I picked him up the nights I was supposed to. Sometimes I was late and he was sitting like a little waif on the curb outside the Montessori school, and I felt guilty. But I got there, and we were able to do it. And I think that if you can focus, as you said, on the children being the most important, it's not about you.
Mm-hmm.
And the child should never be the way for you to get back at the ex because you're still angry or frustrated about something that's occurred. Won't be perfect. You're going to have your run-ins. We did. But you know what? He got married in June, and I was able to sit beside his mother at the wedding, and he was able to have us both there and behaving.
How
So,
nice,
yeah.
how nice, how nice.
Yeah, and I think that's, since we're talking about how to divorce while planning your future relationships, is if I'm meeting somebody new and they're divorced, I want to know how they treated their ex. And so, think about that. I mean, when I used to do litigation cases and I got a nasty case come through my door and they're telling me, there was domestic violence, or there was, pilfering of the funds, or there was a gambling problem or a drinking problem, and I found out that soon-to-be ex was already divorced, the first thing I went down and did was pull their old divorce file, because often the stories were exactly the same. And there's declarations in your divorce file, and there's, things that people can look at. And so if you're trying to plan for a future relationship that you hope is going to be better, then think about how you're divorcing and how you're treating your ex and your children in relationships to your ex. Because that is going to affect your future relationship, and I think future partners are going to look at that.
So, if our viewing public would like more information about how to divorce, we have a divorce options workshop. It is the first Saturday of every month. The next one is on November 3rd. It's from 9 to noon. And tell us quickly, what can folks hope to learn at the divorce options workshop?
Well, it's basically the three professions that you see sitting in front of you, talking you through the different ways you can get divorced, talking about process. And the biggest mistake I think all of us at this table believe that people make entering divorce is not thinking about the process before they get on what I call the divorce escalator. And by the way, the divorce escalator goes down, not up. And that's when one person gets frustrated, angry, goes off and hires an adversarial attorney, and the other person gets terrified and goes finds the most aggressive attorney they can because they want to be protected, and then you're off to the races. And so I think that is something to really guard against.
Yes.
Yeah. So Divorce Options is a chance to talk to a lawyer, a financial, and a mental health professional about how to get divorced. They will go over some basic divorce information on child support, custody, visitation, spousal support, how filing a petition works, and things like that. So it's a great way to start building some information. Information is power, and it'll get you off on a good footing as you choose the process that you want to use to get divorced.
Yes, so for more information about the Divorce Options Workshop, please check out the Collaborative Family Law Group of San Diego website, and you will find more information and a button where you can register online to participate. Thank you, and nice chatting with you both today.
And when's our next show?
Our next show is November...
Did you say?
Is it November?
Well,
It's
4 Tuesdays from now.
November 6th.
November
November
6th.
There we go. Thank you off
At
camera.
1
November
o'clock. We'll be
6th.
back on Facebook Live.
Right after